Three, two, one. Hello, hello, and welcome back to the SEO Mastery Summit. This time around, joined by Rob Te Braake from Insights Matter, Finance Insights Matter. So welcome, Rob.
Thank you, Matt. It's a pleasure to be here.
Excellent, excellent. So you're going to talk about one of the most exciting topics to most SEOs, which is finance and money and stuff. So
Yes.
yeah, I know it's not one of the sort of normally typical topics, but again, as a business consultant, I work and help with many agencies and so on, right? And let's just say finance is one of the things they often haven't got a great grip on. So yeah, I'm looking forward to see the presentation. I'm really hoping lots and lots of people are going to be watching, because yeah, most
I
people
hope
need
so
it.
too, because it's such a shame because most people focus on scaling their agency and forget the finance part, so they miss out on a lot. But I'll cover that in a lot more detail.
Yeah. So excellent. Well, Rob, you can go ahead and take over the world, and I'll be back when you're finished.
Perfect. Thank you. So first of all, welcome everybody. Happy to see you here, and I hope today brings a lot of value to you. And as Matt said, it's probably not the most traditional or the most classic topic for SEO agencies, but arguably one of the most important ones. But of course, I am biased on that. So let's dive in. What if I told you that you can have a better business with more cash flow, more freedom, and less stress? And today I'm going to show you that it's possible. I'm not saying it's easy and there's no magic formula, but it's possible. And today I'm going to teach you how to put the foundations in place that will allow you to achieve that. And I'm not going to do that in a too theoretical way, but I am going to talk about the use case of one of our clients. And unfortunately, because SEO is a relatively small community, everybody knows each other, and finance is super private usually. I had to anonymize the case here, so let's call him Jack. And Jack is the founder of a company called Sparrow SEO. And they are an SEO agency. Last year, they did about $1 million in revenue. This year, they're going to exceed that, as I will show you later on. And the only thing I can tell you about their focus of their business is that they are focused on backlinks. And Jack has absolutely no idea when we started working. He had no idea why the bank account was empty. He had absolutely no idea where they were making a profit, or which of the services, or if they were making a profit at all. He had no clue if they were on the right track, so if the business was heading in the right direction. And he had absolutely no clue which clients were their best clients. Now, it's easy to assume that the biggest client or the one with the highest retainer is the best client, but that's not always the case. So, in other words, Jack felt lost. And that was the reason why we started working together, because that had to change. So, how did we fix this? And again, before I jump in, there's no magic bullet. There's no hacks. There's no fluffy, clickbaity stuff. It's really thorough, foundational work that a lot of you will find slightly boring or uninteresting, but it could be the most valuable investment you make this year. After 6 months, these were the results that Sparrow got. They got a 25%, they realized a 25% increase in their pricing. They freed up more than $200,000 in extra cash flow without any extra work. And they had a 50% growth in revenue. So where last year they did about $1 million, this year they are on track to do about $1.5 million in revenue. On top of these financial results, they got better clients. clients that appreciate more what they're doing, that are easier to work with, they manage to pay themselves a really nice bonus that they can use for their personal lives. And on top of it all, they have less stress, less worries, and they can focus more on actually building the business. Now, before I dive in exactly what we've done, let me introduce myself a little bit. I am Rob. I am the founder of Insight Matters, and I have been building businesses. I've been an entrepreneur since 2011. And my background, my educational background is in finance and in strategy. But over the last 5 years, I've been coaching and guiding entrepreneurs to build and scale their business. Always on the intersection between finance and strategy. And with Insight Matters, we are basically doing exactly that. We help owners of mid-sized agencies, and mid-sized, I mean high six-figure to mid-seven-figure, to get the same level of insights in their business and the same tools to make decisions that corporate CEOs get from their internal CFO or their management teams. So we provide financial reporting and analysis. We help set KPIs, we help to track and measure the KPIs, and on top of that, we hold the owner accountable, and we give advice on how to improve the business to achieve their goals. That being said, before we dive in, the fundamental principle that what we base on, that we work on, is the goal. Our goal is to transform data into information and information into insights. Now, as all of you know from probably more the marketing data, raw information is valuable, but translating that into insights, into meaningful data that with a context that you can use to make decisions, that is where the value is. And financial insights, they help you to grow faster, improve profitability, and overall give a sense of control. Now, we do that in 3 ways. We offer bookkeeping and accounting, not because it's fun, because honestly it's not, but it's because it's the most foundational part in the finance chain. Everything that regards money starts with or is based on bookkeeping. So having that done properly is absolutely critical. Our bread and butter is financial reporting and analysis, and for some existing clients, we offer fractional CFO services on top of that. And we basically, the reporting and analysis is focused on dashboarding, reporting, walkthrough videos, everything to help you as the owner understand where you're at, how your business is doing. That being said, insight starts with foundations. And the first question is always insight in what? Like, what are you trying to get insight in? And the first question you need to ask is actually the least financial of all, at least on the surface. And that is, what is your goal? What are you trying to optimize your business for? And that is more your personal goal, not directly the business itself, but what is your personal goal? Are you trying to build this into like a moonshot 9-digit agency or a unicorn? Are you trying to build this to help make the world a better place and clean up the oceans or the beaches? Is it a lifestyle business, or are you looking to build to sell and realize an exit that gives you life-changing money? No matter what your goal is, we don't have any opinion on that. What your goal is your goal. There is no wrong or there's no right. The critical thing here is that you need to make the goal tangible. So if you are looking to clean up the oceans, how many kilos of plastic do you plan to remove? If it is about a lifestyle business, how many hours a week do you want to work? And what is the personal income that you want to get from that to fund your lifestyle? If it's the exit, what kind of exit valuation qualifies as a success? Are you trying to sell for 1 million, for 10 million, or 100 million? Having clarity on what exactly the goal is absolutely critical, because everything else that I'm going to talk about comes from what is your goal, because everything else needs to support your business development into achieving that goal. If we look at Jack's goals, he was, like honestly almost everybody we talked with initially, very, very unclear on what the goal should be. And the answer was basically, yeah, it's kind of a lifestyle business. We may want to sell it. We may want to grow it, but not too much. And quite indecisive. After a couple of sparring sessions, in the end, the conclusion was, for them, it should be a cash cow business. So they want to take out a certain personal income out of it and then grow it organically as well as they can without spending too much time on it, because they want to put their time and money into other projects. And if there's a good buyer that comes along, sure, they're happy to sell it, but cash cowing it was the absolute main objective. So once you know what your goal is, and I would really encourage you to spend some time on the beach or wherever to think about what that should be. Because the next step is to translate that goal into KPIs. And the KPIs, the key performance indicators, are the ones you're going to measure and track and evaluate along the way. They are the ones that will tell you, are you on the right track or not? Are you progressing towards that goal or not? And here, of course, a slight disclaimer. Not everything that can be counted counts, and not everything that counts can be counted. So no matter how much I live and breathe financial metrics, they're not the end all be all. Employee satisfaction, customer satisfaction, your branding, your reputation, all of those things matter, but are hard to count. But once we dive into the KPIs, there are essentially two types of KPIs, leading ones and lagging ones. They are distinctly different, although there's a bit of a gray zone and they interact a lot. And I think it's critical that you as the owner understand what lagging KPIs and leading KPIs are for your business. The lagging KPIs are the ones that are lagging the action, surprisingly. So they are focused on analyzing past performance. How has your business performed in the last week, month, year, whatever past period you're looking at? And they are very much result-oriented. So they are not things you can directly manage or influence. They are results of other actions. That sounds vague, so let's make that a bit more concrete. Typical lagging KPIs are revenue, profit, and net cash flow. All of these three you can influence, but you can't directly control. So if you want to increase revenue, you can't just flip a switch and increase revenue. There is something else you're doing that leads to higher revenue, whether that is higher pricing or more clients, or there is something you're doing that results in higher revenue. So the lagging ones are the results. And they are almost always, of majority at least, are financial in nature. The leading ones, leading KPIs, are leading the action. They influence future performance. And they are very much action oriented. So you can already see leading KPIs are the ones that you can influence, that you can manage your team on, and they will result in the lagging KPIs. So typical leading KPIs are, for example, the number of leads that you get, the billable rates that you set to your clients, or for example, the number of cold emails that you send. All of these are things that you can directly influence. You can change the rates that you charge, you can send more emails, and you can pretty directly influence how many leads you are getting, because there's actions you can take to get there. So for Sparrow SEO, we did a deep dive in what, given their goal, what should be their KPIs. So in that particular case, we concluded that their goal is the owner needs to get $200,000 personal cash flow every year. And that is, again, something that's clearly a lagging indicator, because that's not something you can directly control. So we broke that down into a next layer who are still lagging indicators. So how do you get to $200,000 personal cash flow? You need to receive enough revenue from your customers, and you need to spend, I'm going to say, as little as possible, so that the gap between the revenue you receive and the cash that you pay out is indeed 200,000 or more. But that is still not directly measurable. So we break that down into a level deeper. Revenue received, of course, is driven by or directly influenced by how much revenue you invoice. And there is a difference between what you invoice and what you receive. We all know the payment terms, so you may send the client an invoice, but if they pay 3 or 6 months later, you don't have the cash in the bank. Looking at the lower cash out, that of course is mainly driven by the costs that you have, and I explained here as the cost per unit of revenue. So how many costs do you have to make to have $1 of revenue? Those two were still not really directly influenceable. So we went another level deeper. And that's when you get to more leading indicators. And before I go through all of them in more detail, these you can still make even more detailed, even more granular. And in general, the rule of thumb is the more granular the indicator, the lower in the organization it needs to be managed. So you as the owner for sure are in charge of the goal and the first layer of lagging indicators. But 1 or 2 levels lower is probably where you get to the first leading indicators. So for Sparrow, the revenue received, we broke that down into, you can influence that by changing the number of clients and by changing the average revenue you get per client. The revenue received can also be influenced not only by how much you invoice, but also by what the average payment term is. So if you manage to have clients pay earlier, you have a better cash flow. Cost per unit of revenue is pretty much driven by the team cost. So how much do you pay in salaries to your writers, your managers, your account managers, etc. And how productive is that team? So how many hours do they need to get a certain thing done? And like on the revenue side, the lower cash out can also be influenced by the average payment term to your suppliers. This session with Sparrow took a bit of effort, but eventually they saw the light. And they started taking action. So in those first few months of working together, they have improved their onboarding of new clients to reduce churn. They had the issue that quite a few clients would leave after 2, 3, 4 months. And by having a better onboarding, they managed to reduce the churn of new clients. So the number of clients went up. They increased their pricing and they fired some of their older, smaller, I wrote it here as bad clients. So that means that the average revenue per client also went up. After our advice, they started changing their payment terms. So they used to invoice at the end of the month, and then people would pay net 15, net 30 if they actually complied with that. And we fully shifted that model to a prepaid model. Now, that may not be suitable for everybody, but in their particular case, in their market situation, they could get away with that. So instead of charging the clients afterwards, they start to charge upfront. So the average payment term dropped from 20-something days to essentially 0. On the team part, they started hiring higher level, more expensive people that require less training and were more productive. So even though their team cost went up, productivity went up even further. So the total team cost per dollar of revenue went down. And in terms of payment terms, they started to maximize the payment terms to some of their suppliers, started utilizing credit cards a bit better, and in general getting a bit more smart on when to pay whom and manage their cash flow better. Now, for you, when you are diving into this exercise and breaking down your goal into the KPIs, there are a couple of classic mistakes that I would like you to avoid. First of all, measure everything. That is one of the most common mistakes. And the simple reality is, when you think that everything is important, nothing is important. I've heard horror stories from my lawyer friends and from retail companies where people were time tracking so detailed that they actually had to time track the time they spent in the bathroom. Now, you have to wonder, does it still make sense to track that time? Does it really still add value in your analysis? In an SEO business, do you really want to track how much time it takes your team to make a new iteration of a visual or to do a new variant of a keyword research? There is a balance to be made between measuring as much as possible, at least measuring the things that are relevant, and measuring too much, where measuring more doesn't add much value, but actually takes quite a bit of time. The other thing, classic, is almost the opposite, and that is focusing too much on one or a few details. I started my career in a bank, and one of the first projects I did there was optimize the process in one of the call centers. And from a management perspective, the call center was a cost. Like most companies view customer support as a cost. So one of the key metrics that management was looking at was the average time an agent spent on the call with a customer. And that was set, the target was set at 3 minutes and was later lowered to 2 minutes. And as you can imagine, and in hindsight it's obvious, what the call center agents started doing was react to that incentive of what they were measured on. So if they didn't know the answer directly to a customer, they would basically give a false solution to the customer and tell them to try that and then call back. They would be rude and cut off the conversation faster. All sorts of actions is what the agents started to take that was against the interest of the bank overall. So instead of using customer service as an opportunity to build fans and loyal customers and really provide service, the agents became super short, rude, and actually became damaging to the bank. So that's what you get when you focus on one detail. In an SEO context, if you would, for example, only measure your team on the time it takes to write a 1,000-page article, or if you only look at the cost per word, or only look at one particular metric, there's a really big chance you're creating perverse incentives that somewhere else in the company is going to backfire. So that is something to keep in mind. And the third one is arguably the most common one of all, and that is vanity metrics. They look great, they make you feel good, but they don't add anything. Now, there may be certain businesses where this doesn't hold up, but I'm going to say that 95% of the businesses, even of the SEO crowd, the number of likes you have on social media, the number of Twitter followers you have, doesn't really make an impact on your business. So it's vanity. You pay attention to it, you try to increase it or improve it, but it has no real effect on your profit or your cash flow. And I deliberately say profit and cash flow here because revenue is a vanity metric. It's a useful one, but it's incredibly overvalued. And to give a really simple example of that, if you have two companies, one has $1 million in revenue, the other one has 10 million in revenue. Probably you're going to think that the one that does 10 million in revenue is the better company or the one you want to own. And on the surface, I would agree. But if you look at the profitability, the 1 million company has a 50% profit. The 10 million revenue one is making a loss. Now, I don't know about you, but I would blindly take 50% of a profit, 50% profit in a smaller company than a loss-making bigger company. So revenue is overvalued. It's cool to tell your neighbors and your friends and like, oh, we're a 6-figure this and a 7-figure that. But in the end, revenue doesn't matter. It's about profit and it's about cash flow. Those are the two most important ones. So once you have your goal and you have translated that into the right KPIs, then the next step is to set up the processes so that you can actually track and manage these KPIs. So this is about getting the right data on the table. And the key thing to note here, and from an SEO, from a marketing analysis, you are very much aware of this, but I still want to repeat it here. Secure data quality. It is absolutely critical. If you're using financial data to make decisions, and in my eyes, you should, it is crucial that you can blindly trust the data that you're looking at. So if the foundation of your financial data, your bookkeeping, if that is a mess, you can't make big decisions looking at your books. You can't make big decisions on which service is profitable, which client is profitable. It really is garbage in, garbage out. So get the right data in place, get the right quality of your accounting or your bookkeeping in place, because that makes all the difference. The other impact of that is if you make decisions based on financial data and the data is wrong, you may be driving your company into the wrong direction. And a quick example from one of our clients, they were looking at their books and it turns out the previous accountant was making one relatively small but quite fundamental structural mistake in their bookkeeping. So they looked a lot less profitable than they actually were. So the owner was super reluctant to hire new people, to invest in marketing, to invest in BD. They have missed out on hundreds of thousands of dollars in growth because they didn't dare to invest because according to the financial data, they couldn't afford it. But the data was wrong. So they could have, and in hindsight, they should have invested. Unfortunately, I also know the examples the other way around, where people overinvest or think they're more profitable than they are, and those companies usually end up bad. So data quality is absolutely critical here. And given that you're all SEO, I think most of them are dreaming about SOPs, and I don't know whether it's dreams or nightmares. So I don't have to go too much in detail on why they are so important, but I do want to emphasize here, there are two people critical in this case. One is the owner of the KPI. Who is in charge of the KPI? Who is responsible to deliver the results on that particular KPI? If it's number of clients, probably your sales or your marketing, or maybe you as the owner is responsible. If it's on the cost side, maybe your operations manager is responsible. But there has to be every KPI needs to have one name and one name only attached to it, who is the owner of that KPI. The second thing is there needs to be somebody in charge of reporting. So somebody who is tracking, analyzing, interpreting, and reporting the KPI to you as the owner. And that also needs to include the frequency, like what are the timelines? What is the frequency that these get reported? Those two people are critical. So on the financial side, there are three classic mistakes that we see. And again, I want to warn you for those. First of all, lack of detail. And the most simple way I can explain this is if you look at your P&L, probably you have one line in there that says sales or revenue. But if you sell 3 types of services and you only have one item in your P&L that says sales, you are missing out on critical information. By lumping all the sales in one line, it becomes impossible to see the profitability and the growth per service or the profitability per client because everything is lumped in one. Second is slow or unclear timelines. And this is probably something you want to discuss with your bookkeeper or accountant. It is the 17th now we are recording this. If today, September 17th, you haven't seen your August results yet, your August P&L and balance sheet, you really need to have a conversation with your accountant. Unfortunately, I know some of you are probably doing the books just once or twice a year, or maybe once a quarter. But in order to use the financials as proper management decision-making, what it should be, you need to have it as soon as possible and at least on a monthly basis. So our rule of thumb is before the 15th, but ideally even before the 10th of the month is when you want to see last month's results. Because the earlier you get the data, the faster you can react on it, and the more power, the faster the feedback loop is, and the faster you can implement changes and see the results of those. And finally, outdated details. So companies evolve. Maybe before, in the lack of detail part, you had 3 types of revenue. But now you've introduced a 4th service and you retired another one and you have a couple of projects here that you usually don't. All of a sudden, the framework in your P&L is outdated. It doesn't fit anymore with how your business actually runs. So updating your chart of accounts or the P&L structure at least once or twice a year is very, very important, especially when your company is changing rapidly. So I know I went through this relatively fast, so let's quickly summarize. Start with your goals. Everything you do starts with the goals. What are you trying to optimize for? Then translate that into the KPIs that actually help you get there. If you're looking to build a lifestyle business, you want to focus on cash flow. If you want to build a cash cow business, you want to focus on cash flow. If you want to build a moonshot and become the next Airbnb or Uber, you want to focus on revenue. So your KPIs need to align with your goals. And thirdly, ensure you have the right processes set up and the ownership of each part allocated so that you actually get the right information on your plate. Sparrow, SEO, they were trying to build a cash cow business. They've done so, and they've got a lot closer to their target by looking at their metrics, translating their goal into the KPIs, in the lagging KPIs, and one level deeper, the leading KPIs, and taking action on those. And these actions, in 6 months' time, led to 25% higher prices, $200,000 extra free cash flow, and 50% growth in monthly revenue. So It is hard foundational work, but if you do it properly, it has amazing results. And now you're going to say, that looks like a lot of work. And that is because it is a lot of work. It's not rocket science, but it's not easy either. But this process, from identifying your goals up to the processes, is exactly what we do in the game plan. In 4 relatively simple steps, from a call that really drills down on your company, your business, and your goals, we translate that into the KPIs, discuss those with you, set up the processes, and give you an implementation roadmap to implement those processes yourself. So that gives you a full breakdown of your leading and lagging KPIs, all the data needs and data sources that belong to that, and the processes that you can implement to actually start tracking your KPIs and actually make sure you hit your goals. Based on our customer experience, on the client's experience, this is what it seems to deliver. A clear path towards your goals, peace of mind, better and smarter decisions, faster growth, less time spent working, and an empowered team because they own some of the KPIs. Now, Max Hardy, the co-founder and CEO of 10x Travel, basically called it a game changer, and it transformed their business in the most positive way possible. For people in the SEO Mastery Summit, we usually charge $995 for the game plan. We offer 20% off. And I think Matt and the team will send an email afterwards with all the details you need for that. And otherwise, it's here in the presentation as well. Go to financeinsightmatters.com/SEO mastery to learn more. That being said, I would be very happy to jump into the Q&A. If you guys have any questions, feel free to ask.
Perfect. Yes, and again, to the audience, you can ask both on the Eventi platform, and you can ask if you're watching live here on YouTube and likes. So you can ask in both places. So thank you very much, Rob. That was interesting. As I said, most SEOs are better looking at their search result than they are at their finances. So one of the most typical bad habits of SEO is checking rank trackers about 3 times a day to see if ranking changed. But if they would spend about a third of the time they spend on rank trackers looking at their finances, they would be on a different planet. I was about to say.
From experience, yes.
So, couple of questions here. So we start out. Gary is asking, at what business income level does it make sense to work with a finance expert like yourself?
It differs a bit on the complexity. If you have one service line, one business, and a super slim team, probably upper 6 figures is where it becomes relevant or interesting. If you are one of those people that makes it relatively complex with 15 different offerings and a scattered team across all the projects, $500,000 in revenue annualized is probably the latest point you want to have somebody to bring the structure and give you the right basics.
Cool. Then there's a question from John. What metrics should I look at to evaluate the productivity of my current employees and if I should be hiring more new employees?
Okay. That depends a bit on how are you paying your team? Is that purely based on results? Is it based on hours? In a more classic agency where it's more of a consulting service setup, you want to look at billable rates, like billable percentages. How much of their hours are billable? If that is too low, you have either a productivity issue or a revenue issue. If that's too high, you probably are too late with hiring. As a rule of thumb, I would say there should be about 75% of hours worked that should be billable for the more billable team members. If you are paying your team per article or per piece written or per campaign that they launched, the workload factors are much softer, and that's much more a conversation style with them to gauge how their workload is and how their quality of their work is. So that becomes a little bit less financial.
Okay. Now we have Sophie here. I'm always insecure about when to hire more people, as I'm afraid to spend too much money. What's the right way to arrange hiring? Or I guess like the hiring process.
Yeah. On the hiring process, I'm not the expert. I think one of the other sponsors is much better at that. But the moment to hire, again, if it's a consulting kind of setup where you rent out people on billable rates, if you have the revenue to load them up at least 50%, go ahead and hire. And if you can load them up 75% or more from the start, you're probably already too late.
Yeah.
If it's not a that kind of consulting kind of setup, but more a rank tracker analyst, for example, you really want to look at the quality of and the results that the rest of the team are delivering. If there's usually a bit of a curve, if that starts to go down, so the effectiveness and the value that they start adding goes down, my experience is that's when they get overworked, and that's when you want to take a little bit away and start hiring and training new people. Yeah. From a financial perspective, there's a difference between cost of salespeople that are like billable and overhead people that are overhead and that don't contribute directly to the business. As a rule of thumb, and it really differs on the specifics of your business, but if your overhead is more than 25% of revenue, you don't want to add more people there yet.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. And yeah, I think it's also a question of how much you're actually charging, right? Because you need to make sure your whole model is actually tying together. Because like I see a lot of people initially starting out with a couple of clients that charging what they feel is reasonable. And, you know, as soon as they start hiring people, they don't really have enough to pay for those people and pay for the overhead to manage them and whatever, right? So my experience is definitely you really need to make sure that you have your sort of your numbers are making sense, right? Generally from an agent's, go ahead.
Yeah, on a really high over back of the envelope approach, the cost of an employee, and I'm deliberately saying employee here and not freelancer because that's slightly different. Employee is the salary cost plus benefits plus an allocation of the overhead. As a rule of thumb, the total cost of an employee is 1.5 times their salary. So assume that that's what it costs you to have that person in your team, including software costs and other overhead allocations.
Yeah. Yeah. So I would say you definitely need to work out, and this is also a growth thing, right? When you're in the beginning, if you have a team with just yourself as the overhead and then 5 or 6 staff members, it's easier to calculate how much money you have and how much it will cost and what you can afford to pay. The second your agency starts growing bigger and you need middle management in there and so on, it definitely also impacts your overhead, right? Yeah. Now, generally the benefit with being bigger in size is that you become more effective and that you can do things better at scale, so that generally completing a task becomes cheaper, and that typically pays for the cost of additional management. But again, depending on the business model, that might or might not be the case. So you really need to look at the numbers and really have a good idea. Typically when I work with SEO agencies, I'll say in most cases, you want to try and stay below 30 to 35% of your total cost in the company being employees, right? So if you can stay below around 30%, that's typically what the agencies I work with. If you can stay below that, you're usually at a good place. But again, you need to have control of all of your numbers, and you need to understand them, right? And that's why we're talking about it today, because the numbers are so important, right? I've met many people who run agencies, making, you know, 7-figure agencies, and they're literally taking out a couple of $1,000s for themselves every month, because there's no profits left. They spend it all on hiring, they spend it all on building, you know, big offices and all these kind of things. And you don't want to be in that position, because the risk you have by running a huge company like that versus the reward does not make sense in a scenario like that.
In general, not unless it's a really deliberate choice that they want to grow as big as possible, as fast as possible.
Sure.
If that is the goal, then that could make sense. But it would not be my choice.
No. Right. Next question here. Sandra is saying, what is good profit margins in an agency? We have generally been sitting between 12% to 24, 25%, but not sure where it should be.
I'm going to assume you mean net margin in that case, given those numbers.
Gross margin. I'll hope so.
I hope so too. Gross margin for sure should be at least 50%. And within some boundaries, higher is better. Net margins depends a bit on the investments that you want to make in future growth. So if you really want to invest a lot in growing faster and growing further, you probably want to have a higher marketing budget and more people to realize that growth. So your profitability is going to be a bit lower, but that's going to pay off in future growth. That being said, if your net margin gets below 15%, I would get worried. So if you're focusing on growth, 15 to 20, and if you're looking at more to maximize profits and lower growth, 25 is a really nice benchmark.
Yeah, and that, I mean, I typically again say for agencies and so on, 25 to 30% net profits is generally pretty good, right? So yeah,
25 to 30 is pretty good, but I don't see that many that actually realize that.
And you haven't seen too many of the clients I work with. But yeah, that's all good. That's all good. Next question: how to correctly calculate what to charge clients? Usually we just say 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 based on whatever the sales guy feel he can get away with. But is there a framework to effectively find out what to charge a client?
There are 3 ways of pricing. Cost-based pricing, time and materials basically. So we spend 10 hours, this is the cost of an hour plus a profit margin. There's market-based pricing. So the competitor is charging them 2,000 and we think we're a bit better, so we charge 2,500. And there's value-based pricing. And that basically means we think the value of what we're delivering to this client is worth 10,000, so we charge about 20% of that value. There's not an absolute wrong or right. Overall, if you know the value of what you're doing, I prefer value-based pricing because in general, that leads to much higher prices. But that requires that you really have a good picture of how much value you're delivering for your client in their eyes. Because of course, you think you're doing amazing, but it's about what they think the value is. Yeah. So the approach of the sales guy, like, oh, what we get away with, is not necessarily the worst, as long as it's getting more sophisticated in understanding why he can get away with what price for which clients.
Yeah. Yeah, and honestly, I see this one a lot. Like a lot of time people are like, oh, you know, we used to charge 1K per client, but now we charge 2K. And there's not really a particular mindset behind it. It's just like, let's try and charge more money. And, you know, the next sales call, let's ask for 500 more or something. And that there isn't necessarily a solid framework behind it, right?
No, but I think in general, at least from my experience, my own experience and what I see with the clients, the higher you charge, assuming you deliver the value, the easier your clients will become.
Yep, I totally agree. And I think that's probably a universal law of everything. I think generally when you're dealing with the lowest cost clients, they're always the biggest pain in the backside, and they're always the ones asking most questions, ones the most focused. And typically it's understandable. It's often the people that don't have a lot of money, and therefore they are more reluctant to spend them, and when they do spend them, they expect a lot for a little money, right? So I think that's definitely, yeah, that's spot on. That is spot on. So do you guys do both finance and accounting, or what services do you provide?
Yeah, so we provide basically the full service. We do the accounting, and again, not because we love accounting, but because it's so bloody damn important it gets done well. Our focus is on translating the account reporting and analysis, translating the information that's hiding in your books into meaningful insights. So that means a financial dashboard. We run the analysis on top of that, and we run you through what we see, why we see that, and what we think you should or could do with that information. And if needed, we do consulting on top of that as well, but we try to focus and add as much value as possible in a standardized offering.
Okay. From a financial perspective, how many staff members do you typically have per manager?
I don't think there's a purely financial answer to that. I think that is really depends on what business it is, what kind of people you have. If you have really self-motivated, educated, capable people, you need less managers than when you have purely execution-driven people that take it as a job because they have to pay the bills.
Yeah.
So there's not a financial side. I think, Matt, you are better suited
I can
to answer this one.
I can give the managerial answer at least, right? So typically I say between 8 to 12 for managers within businesses, and about 5 to 6 if you're a CEO, right? Or a business owner. So 8 to 12. Generally what I say is if you have roles where people are doing different jobs, so if you manage your marketing team where people are doing different roles, so one is doing pay-per-click, one is doing SEO, one is doing this and that, if they're doing more roles, it takes more time and effort to manage. So around 8 to 9 is probably better. If they're doing simple, straightforward roles, so let's say everyone is doing customer service, or everyone's doing SEO, or everyone's doing kind of the same type of job, it's often easier to sort of both measure, but it's also easier to manage if everyone does the same job, because it's more comparable. The things you talk about would be the same with the different people and so on, right? So depending on that, I typically say sort of between 8 to 12 people. Again, sometimes particularly for more senior roles, it might be even lower than that, right? But that's the managerial answer. Again, from a finance perspective, what Rob alluded to before, like you need to make sure that your team is managed. And I mean, I've been in the position corporately where I've managed over 20 people, and I can tell you I've done it. I can tell you it's not effective, and I can tell you probably, even though you pay for another manager, you probably get significantly better output by doing half of that. So, yeah.
The only thing I want to add there is, no matter how many people it is, make sure in your cost calculation, so what is the cost of delivering your service, you include that management capacity. I've seen that go wrong more times than I would like to admit.
So how do you effectively calculate your overhead?
Your overhead is all your costs that you make that do not directly contribute to delivering of the service. So that means if you have an office, it's the office rent, it's your accountant, it's your marketing cost, it's your project management software, all those costs that you make that are not one-on-one linked to delivering to a client. So that all those costs together is your overhead.
Right. And I think one thing I see a lot is that when people are playing around with overheads, they suddenly think they might be losing money on certain things. And while that can be the case, it's also important to understand that the more overhead is spread over, the more it breaks down, right? Because I work with a couple of clients and they're like, oh, we removed our lower pricing bracket. even though it was super easy to deliver, but we didn't make money from it. And I was like, wait a minute, you're not making money from it. And they're like, no, because when we take the cost of the employee doing it plus the overhead, it doesn't make sense. But what they had done was they had about 60 employees, and they had just split the overhead evenly between the employees, right? And what happened with that obviously is that the lower cost services then didn't make sense, right? But reality is that when they removed those lower cost services, you had a significant overhead that needed to be paid by the remainder of the people.
Yeah.
So you need to really you need to think about how you not just calculate your overhead, but more so how you actually distribute the overhead in your
Over
sort of
the
finance
different
setup.
teams or services, yes.
Yeah.
And there's a bunch of ways to do that. You can do that based on revenue. You can do that based on the number of clients. You can do that based on the headcount. Again, it depends a bit on the specifics of the business. What is the most practical or realistic approach there?
Yeah.
But don't just say, oh, we have 3 services, so we cut the overhead in 3, and therefore every service has its own portion of the overhead. It needs to be linked to something to give a realistic picture.
Now, that also said, again, you could definitely have situations where they lose money on the service, right? So, again, like I've seen with a lot of particularly SEO sort of agencies where, again, they just charge this set fee of $1,000, and then automatically there's just clients that they spend so much more time on than others. And realistically, if you go in and look at it on an hourly basis and where the time actually goes when they start measuring, they do often realize that there is clients they lose money on. It's not necessarily because they're priced incorrectly. Well, they're priced incorrectly for what they're doing, but it's as much having a clear expectation. If we charge a client $1,000 a month, what does that mean we do for them, right? Because the problem with a lot of SEOs is like, oh, well, we work until it's done, but that's not really that's a difficult way of doing it. So you really want to say, if we deliver, if we have $1,000 client, we're going to deliver X amount of hours of work, or we're going to get, 2 hours of tier A people and 10 hours of tier B people or something like that, so that you have a good idea of what is it's equivalent to, right?
True.
Excellent, Rob. I think we are nearly at the hour, so I think let's stop it here. But thank you very, very much for coming in. And as I said in the intro as well, so I really recommend definitely if people are at a scale where they are making some money and have a good revenue flow, I really recommend they go and have a look at what you guys do and see if it's a good fit, because most agencies do not have their finances under control, and it's very often costing a lot of money. So,
leaving a lot of money on the table. Yes,
definitely.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. Fantastic.
My pleasure.
And to everyone else, we'll be back again live tomorrow at the same time.